Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. As countries around the world scramble to lower their emissions, this week we'll be examining whether hydrogen could become a key part of the global clean energy mix. Green, blue or grey? We look at the different forms of hydrogen and ask which is best placed to help the world fight climate change. Future-proofing: how long-time oil-producing countries are looking to hydrogen to stay ahead of the curve. And show me the money. Is enough being invested to help wean the world off its addiction to fossil fuels? With extreme weather increasingly linked to climate change around the world, the race is hotting up to find reliable sources of green energy. And hydrogen may be the answer. For decades, hydrogen has long been hailed as a potentially revolutionary alternative to fossil fuels and is Earth's most abundant element. Green hydrogen is produced by splitting water using electricity generated from low-carbon sources, resulting in no greenhouse gas emissions. Green hydrogen can be used in cars and lorries. Hydrogen-powered aircraft are already being designed by Airbus, with a planned release of the first commercial plane by 2035. Green hydrogen can also be used domestically for cooking and heating. Hydrogen heating is expected to power most homes in the UK by 2050. There are other types of hydrogen which can be used to generate power, but none are as fully carbon neutral. As of 2020, the global hydrogen market was valued at $150 billion and is expected to reach $600 billion by 2050. China is the leader of the global hydrogen market with an output of 20 million tons, accounting for a third of global production. Beijing aims to generate 500,000 tons of green hydrogen by 2025. Japan intends to transform the nation into a hydrogen society, with plans to supply 10% of the power for electricity generation by 2050. The EU has also unveiled its hydrogen strategy for a climate-neutral Europe, hoping hydrogen will comprise 15% of the EU energy mix by 2050. And in the US, Joe Biden's $1 trillion infrastructure package includes $8 billion to develop hydrogen as part of his administration's climate agenda. So to find out more about the different types, indeed colours of hydrogen, I'm joined now by Michael Bradshaw. And Michael is a Professor of Global Energy at Warwick Business School. First of all, Michael, tell us more about green hydrogen and why it's considered to be the cleanest version.
Green hydrogen is produced using renewable energy, zero carbon power, electricity, and the process of hydrolysis. And it produces hydrogen and water as a byproduct. So it doesn't emit any carbon dioxide, and therefore it is a net zero source of energy. Although hydrogen itself is the energy carrier here, the power, the energy itself is in the renewable electricity, which is then stored as hydrogen.
But it is very expensive to produce.
Yes, the International Energy Agency at the moment estimates that it's about 3 times the cost of blue hydrogen.
So let's talk about blue hydrogen, because that is being widely talked about as another potential green energy source. What's the difference, and why are some questioning blue hydrogen's green credentials?
Well, blue hydrogen is using natural gas as the feedstock, and it's using a process called steam reformation to produce that natural gas, from natural gas to produce that hydrogen. The problem there is it creates a lot of carbon dioxide as a byproduct. That's the way we produce hydrogen today. It's so-called grey hydrogen. To turn it to blue hydrogen, you need to have something that captures the carbon dioxide and either stores it underground, which is known as carbon capture and storage, or uses that carbon dioxide, for example, in an industrial process, which would be carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So blue hydrogen is essentially decarbonizing natural gas.
So tell us a little, just to interrupt you, about carbon capture and why that's so important. If you describe exactly what it is, because the UK is taking quite a lead in this.
Yeah, so the idea is that you capture the carbon dioxide from, it could be from a power plant, from an industrial process, or in this case, from a steam reforming plant that's producing hydrogen. You capture that carbon dioxide, and then you would put it in a pipeline. In the case of the UK, you would pipe it offshore and then store it underground in a depleted gas field. So you've captured the CO2 and you've stored it underground, and the emissions don't go into the atmosphere and contribute to global warming.
So let's go back to hydrogen, other types of hydrogen. We've talked about green and blue. You made reference to grey hydrogen. What is that?
Grey hydrogen is the way we produce hydrogen today, and it's used almost entirely within industrial processes. 99% of current hydrogen is used within industry, and it's simply that first stage of blue hydrogen, that you use methane, natural gas, and steam reformation to produce hydrogen. The problem is, for every ton of hydrogen you produce 10 tons of CO2. And at the moment, that's not captured. That's simply vented into the atmosphere and contributing to global warming.
Is that why hydrogen at the moment isn't seen as an essential part of green energy mix?
Absolutely. At the moment, it's not offering a low carbon opportunity. It's making the situation worse, not better.
Michael, if you were a betting man, which hydrogen would win the race?
I think when it comes to green hydrogen, there's a kind of a chicken and egg problem here. We need to build up the infrastructure, and we need to see the prices fall, which they probably will do quite rapidly in the way that, solar and wind power fell. But I think this idea of a blue to green strategy, where you build the infrastructure using blue hydrogen, and then later in the day you would convert to green hydrogen, is probably the way that more industrialized economies are going to go. The problem is really the economics of building a blue hydrogen economy and then switching it off and turning it green. So I would think that in the near term, at least, we've got to prove, on the one hand, that we can produce blue hydrogen at scale, and we haven't proved that we can deliver carbon capture at scale either. But I think also we need to progress with the development of the technologies around green hydrogen, driving down the cost of the electrolyzers, for example, that are used to produce it. But also we need a much larger amount of cheap, or if not free, renewable power to make it work. So I would probably develop both in parallel and hope for a kind of a blue to green transition.
Are people being over-optimistic then when they describe hydrogen as a sort of holy grail of green energy?
Yes, I think some of its critics talk about the level of hydrogen hype. And I think you also need to look at what the different types of hydrogen are doing and who's supporting them. So blue hydrogen, as I said, is decarbonizing natural gas, and the ideas are that you could put in existing gas pipelines and store it underground and so on and so forth. It's supported by the natural gas industry because it's a way of keeping demand for natural gas. Its detractors are those who support the renewable industry and want to see ever increasing levels of renewable power, which then is stored as hydrogen, which is the low carbon solution. And ultimately, that's where we need to be.
And will it be, as before, only the developed countries who can move forward with this kind of research, development, and of course investment?
Potentially initially, but I think in the longer term, you can use these technologies at multiple scales, and it may be in the context of having a local renewable power system that producing hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells as well. You can use that to actually store electricity locally and then use it when you don't have access to wind and solar power. So at a lower scale, it might be part of local or regional energy systems. And perhaps as an alternative to natural gas, which at the moment, again, the gas industry is trying to convince people that gas is a transition fuel. So it may be that green hydrogen can play a role at multiple scales. There are grand schemes for countries that have lots of solar power or lots of wind power to generate large amounts of hydrogen and then put it on ships and sell it to everyone else. So I think what it does highlight, which is the bigger reality, is that there is no one size fits all in this energy transition, and that different countries and different regions will follow different paths, and hydrogen will maybe play a different role depending on where in the world we are.
Michael Bradshaw, Professor of Global Energy, many thanks to you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you very much.
One man who's been leading green energy projects for more than 30 years is Frank Wouters. Frank is currently chairman of the Middle East and North Africa Hydrogen Alliance, which he set up to help promote and develop green hydrogen economies in the region. And he joins me now from Abu Dhabi. Frank, you formed this alliance last year. You're chairman of the alliance. What do you hope to achieve?
Basically, what we're trying to achieve is to create a platform for stakeholders in the region that would like to explore the opportunities that hydrogen gives them. And, hydrogen can be made from sunshine, wind, and water, and there is an abundant number of that available in, the MENA region. Of course, the desert areas have a lot of sunshine, but also are very windy. So the potential to create a new hydrogen economy based on that natural resource, basically building on, to some extent, also the oil and gas legacy is there, and it's up for grabs. And it's a new thing. So having an association like ours that provides a platform for people to come together and debate, to speak as one voice, but also to be a source of knowledge on the topic is crucial.
You say it's a new thing. I wonder whether the oil and gas industry have held the development back of hydrogen because it could be a threat to them.
Well, it's perhaps a threat, but it's more an opportunity. And what we're seeing right now, there's a number of drivers for the development of the hydrogen economy. It's of course countries that now import hydrocarbons, and they have the opportunity to replace them with hydrogen made within their own borders. But also for the traditional exporters of hydrocarbons, I mean, they're actually blessed to some extent with hydrocarbons, but also with the same natural resources that the other countries have: abundant, low-cost land, great renewable resource. And they have the advantage that they have, of course, 40, 50 years of a presence in the energy trade. So for them to jump on the hydrogen bandwagon also makes a lot of sense. So it's also an opportunity.
How can hydrogen contribute to the decarbonization of end users in the various sectors?
Well, hydrogen is a key element. What we've seen in the past, let's say 10, 20 years is the massive uptake of renewable electricity. We all see solar panels and wind turbines replacing traditional forms of power generation. But the reality is that electricity is currently 20% of final energy, and 80% are molecules. That's coal for power generation, it's diesel for driving, it's natural gas for heating homes. And this is where hydrogen has a much more natural role in addition to green electricity. So the combination of green electricity and green hydrogen is what probably will be the majority of the energy carriers that we'll have in the future in a decarbonized setting.
So what will make, do you think, the biggest difference that will enable hydrogen technology to become perhaps more viable?
Well, as you already mentioned, it is a technology. So all of these things, whether it's a solar panel or wind turbine, basically you tap into a natural resource that is sustainable. It's wind, it's solar, it's to some extent hydro. And then if you add an electrolyzer, it's another piece of technology that then converts water into hydrogen and oxygen. And the fact that we're basing our future energy on technologies is a major game changer, because they have the tendency, and that's the same whether it's a computer screen or a smartphone or an electrolyzer or a solar panel. The more you make them, the more you get to scale, the cheaper they become. So in the future, we'll actually have relatively cheap energy compared to what we had in the past. And those are some of the elements that, of course, we have to work on crossing and closing a cost gap that is still there. But in the future, it will be actually really cost efficient.
What industry, if there is a single industry, do you think will be the biggest driver for a widespread hydrogen economy?
Well, there's a number actually, and if you look at where a lot of energy is consumed, it's the transport sector, of course, heavy duty vehicles, but also cars, trains, and planes, maritime. So all of those burn at the moment hydrocarbons and predominantly diesel and gasoline. So that's a very natural place. It's also relatively highly priced, so it's easier to get to cost competitiveness with green hydrogen or green ammonia for that matter early. But then there is industrial, large offtake opportunities in the steel sector, the ammonia sector, refining. So those are some of the sectors that are all at the moment looking how can they clean up and become, fit for the future. And hydrogen is definitely on everybody's agenda.
I wonder, Frank, whether the time has come for hydrogen. Has it finally arrived in the imagination and perhaps soon to arrive in the balance sheets?
But there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. Hydrogen has gone through a number of cycles, and perhaps there was a little bit too much enthusiasm, let's say 15 years ago. But currently, what we're seeing is a number of things that come together. First of all, there's an urgent need to decarbonize our economy. So there is, evidence of climate chaos is growing. People are aware of that. The global population wants leadership to move. And the other thing that we have now that we didn't have before is actually really cost-effective green electricity, which is, the largest cost factor in the production cost of green hydrogen, and that we didn't have 10 years ago. So those are some of the things that are definitely going to drive the hydrogen agenda.
So give me some informed speculation. You know better than most of looking ahead. If green hydrogen is going to become the widely used fuel of the future, how soon could that happen?
I think within 10 years, we'll see that green hydrogen can actually compete on a pure cost comparison basis with alternatives. So within 10 years, it's going to be, on a path to, replace other forms of energy carriers, in a very, very rapid way. And, one of the things that I believe, and if I look at the technology, the way you make it, the way, scale up will have an amplifying effect, we will see exponential growth. And that is something that we've seen with photovoltaics. Exponential growth, it surprises everybody. The human brain is not hardwired to grasp the speed with which something like this can grow. There's nothing that stands in the way of hydrogen to go through a similar development.
Frank Wouters, many thanks to you for talking to us here on The Agenda.
You're welcome.
Still to come here on The Agenda, we'll be asking a global energy expert what more needs to be done to ensure hydrogen really can become the eco-fuel of the future.
Roger, Radio Loud, clear.
We can try out the wild and the crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
There is no more they, or you, or me. In today's economic landscape, there is only we. An interconnected world of business, trade, and investment. Daily coverage told simply, with insight and new perspectives. Global business. We've got the world covered.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The Agenda. So it's clear that green hydrogen can help lower global emissions, but how close is it to becoming more widely used both domestically and commercially? Well, joining me now from London is Kate Dorian, and Kate is a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Kate, is green hydrogen the real deal?
There's a lot of hype at the moment around green hydrogen. Everybody's trying to jump on the bandwagon, but it's still very patchy. It's not a global market yet.
But it's a viable alternative, you think?
I think it is. I mean, you're not going to reach your net zero targets, whether by 2050 or 2060, if you don't include hydrogen in its various colors, particularly green and blue, in the energy mix. So I think it is going to be an integral part of the future energy mix. I think the problem is scaling it up to reach these targets, very ambitious targets that are being set by various governments.
Do you think they're attainable then? You're describing them as very sort of difficult targets in a way.
If you look at targets that have been set in the past, you miss a target, you raise it again. I think the technology is moving very quickly. I think it's not just the technology exists. We know hydrogen is there, it's everywhere. You can convert this bottle of water I've got here into hydrogen by splitting molecules. The problem is it's still very expensive. So it bears down to cost, it bears down to scaling up, huge projects, and that's going to take time. And you have to bring the cost down. Whether you can do it with or without subsidies is the question.
So is there enough investment in its production at the moment?
At the moment, no. I mean, if you look at the projections of how much investment is needed, and I'm going to have to look at my notes for this one, because the Hydrogen Council, which has more than 30 countries as its members, says that total investment of 300 billion will be needed for all announced projects to be realized. But to date, only 80 billion worth of projects are either operational or commissioned. So you have a big gap. And if you look at the major projects that have been announced, particularly in the Middle East, you have the 5 billion project in Saudi Arabia, NEOM. That's not going to come to be operational till 2025, or at least that's the target date. But those mega projects tend to sometimes run, behind schedule. So I think it is a big challenge to scale it up. And there are some skeptics.
You're obviously saying this isn't a quick fix. Nobody's going to just tap into hydrogen and solve the world's energy problems. But the point I'm trying to make is how much attention is blue and green hydrogen getting from governments? And how interested are they around the world, especially perhaps the poorer governments, because of the level of investment they would need?
Well, exactly. And I think that's why I say it's very fragmented at the moment. There is no global market. And if you're going to have, green or blue hydrogen, it's going to be mainly to decarbonize these really hard to abate sectors, steel industry. Morocco is investing in hydrogen as well. They produce a lot of fertilizer, which which needs to be greened, which needs to be, produced cleaner, in a cleaner way. So, you have in the UAE, they are using hydrogen to decarbonize their steel production. So, the technology is evolving, and there are ways in which you can actually use hydrogen for storage, for example. So if you have interruptible supplies, if renewables are the biggest investment we've seen in the electricity sector is in renewables. It's more than 50% in the last year. So that requires storage, and hydrogen provides a solution. So, I mean, it's a multifaceted, the uses of hydrogen are quite varied. You can use it to decarbonize heavy industry. People are looking at aviation and shipping, but I think that's a long time coming, because you can't just put it in the tank.
No, and if you look at the aviation industry say there's not enough investment to make that happen anyway.
No, I mean, if you look at the IEA's projections of what is needed, I mean, green hydrogen is currently only 1% of the global market. So you can imagine how much it needs to be scaled up if you're going to reach these targets. I think.
But isn't that a big incentive for the biggest CO2 emitting countries to invest in it, and quickly?
Well, yes, they are. I mean, for the United States, I think it's going to be more for its internal use. But if you look at the infrastructure, for example, for hydrogen fuel cell cars, there aren't really that many stations where you can fill up. So you've got some in California and maybe one on the East Coast. So I think that's what really need. You can't put the horse before the cart. Well, the cart before the horse. so to speak, because that's what a lot of countries are doing. Now, I think for the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they accept that there is a need to develop these new technologies, hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green, or whatever color. I think you can even have pink hydrogen in the UAE because they can use their nuclear power to produce it. So, but they also say, hang on a second, you're still going to need liquid fuels, particularly in the transportation sector. So they're preparing for the time when maybe demand for oil and gas is going to start declining, oil before gas, obviously. But, you look at Europe at the moment and we have shortages of gas in Europe. So people are burning coal. It all boils down to supply.
Which seems to be a process that's going backwards.
Well, exactly. Coal is supposed to be phased out. So I think it's very difficult to get the balance right. And
what are the incentives around, do you think, Kate, to persuade governments they've got to get moving? I mean, they got moving over COVID and the pandemic to find a vaccine. Why can't they get moving quickly enough on energy?
Well, I think it's, again, it all boils down to supply-demand fundamentals. At the moment, you don't have a proper market. So you can't really gauge supply and demand. You can't really plan. I mean, all these governments have in their 2050 net zero scenarios. They all have hydrogen is a component of these scenarios. So I think you need public sector partnerships, you need access to finance, and you need to remember the 1 billion people in Africa who have no access to basic energy. So I think that's where the problem is. And you have the skeptics who say, hang on a second, it's probably cleaner to just burn. I think there was Cornell University had an analysis the other day saying it's actually cleaner to just burn gas than produce green blue hydrogen. So there are still challenges.
So the jury's out. Kate Dorian, many thanks to you for joining us on the agenda.
Thank you.
Hydrogen is the most common element in our universe, and it could hold the key to a more sustainable fuel of the future. The UK government is already planning trials to install hydrogen in people's homes as a viable alternative to natural gas. It's a clear sign that green solutions like hydrogen will play a part in generating carbon neutral and therefore sustainable fuels. Governments recognise the need to lower their greenhouse gas emissions and wean themselves away from fossil fuels, so transitioning to cleaner fuels like green and blue hydrogen could well be part of the answer. But as Kate Dorian told me, new eco-fuels won't come cheaply. Not in the first instance, anyway. She estimates $300 billion will be needed for current clean hydrogen projects. The idea of green hydrogen as a multi-purpose energy store has inspired visionaries for a couple of generations, but it's still in its early stages of acceptance. All our guests on the agenda this week support clean hydrogen as a vital part of reducing emissions. The question is, which of its various forms will make the biggest contribution to the green energy mix? Professor Bradshaw predicts that most industrialised economies will build the infrastructure around blue hydrogen, using carbon capture methods first, and then transition towards green hydrogen as the cost of clean, renewable energy becomes cheaper. So, if hydrogen is to become the eco-fuel of the future, and many think it must do, governments need to listen to the scientists and plan their eco-budgets and economies in a sustainable way, and that includes using hydrogen as the eco-fuel of the future. Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future agenda, will the latest round of UN climate talks produce the breakthrough needed to keep the Paris Agreement alive? But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.